If you asked most gardeners in the middle of August how their garden is doing, you'd probably get a shrug. The tomatoes are winding down, the lettuce bolted weeks ago, and there's this quiet assumption that the season is basically over. Time to clean up, maybe throw down some cover crop, and start dreaming about next spring. That assumption is costing people their best harvest of the entire year. Here's the part nobody tells you. August is not the end of the growing season. For a huge number of crops, it's actually the start of the best window you'll get all year, and the reason has nothing to do with luck. It's biology. As soil and air temperatures start dropping through September and October, a lot of vegetables respond by converting the starches they've stored into sugar. It's a survival response, a kind of natural antifreeze, and it happens to make the plant taste dramatically better in the process. A carrot pulled in November after a few cool nights is a completely different vegetable than the same carrot pulled in July. Same seed, same soil, same gardener. The only difference is timing. This isn't a gardening myth passed around in Facebook groups. It's a documented physiological response in crops like kale, carrots, cabbage, and a handful of others we're getting into today. And once you understand that mechanism, August stops looking like a dead month and starts looking like the smartest 4 weeks you'll spend in the garden all year. The tricky part is that August still comes with real heat. Some of these seeds will not germinate at all if the soil is too warm. Lettuce actually shuts down and refuses to sprout past a certain temperature. So a few of these crops need one specific trick to get going, and I'm going to walk you through that trick for every single one, not just tell you to plant it and see. We've got 20 vegetables today, and by the time we're done, you'll know exactly what to put in the ground this week to be eating fresh food by the time everyone else has already given up for the year. Before we get into the list, if you're new to this channel, this is where I break down the actual reasons behind what works in the garden, not just a checklist. So if that's useful to you, go ahead and subscribe now so you don't miss what's coming later this fall. And while you're at it, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and roughly when your first frost usually hits, because a lot of what I'm about to say depends heavily on your specific climate, and I want to see how different that timing looks across everyone watching. All right, let's get into it. 20 vegetables, 1 planting window. 1. Radishes. Radishes are the fastest thing on this entire list. Depending on the variety, you're looking at 20 to 40 days from seed to harvest, which means some of these could be on your plate before the month is even over. The mistake most people make with radishes has nothing to do with planting them too late. It's leaving them in the ground too long once they're ready. A radish that sits past its window under heat and inconsistent moisture turns woody, hollow, and sharp enough to make you regret growing it at all. The fix is simple. Sow a short row every 10 days from now through the middle of September. That way you always have a fresh batch coming in instead of one giant harvest that goes bitter before you can eat it all. Good varieties for this stretch include Champion, Cherry Belle, Daikon, Icicle, Easter Egg, and Sparkler. Pull them on time and you get something crisp and mild. Leave them a few extra days and you get something you'll throw in the compost instead. 2. Spinach. Spinach has one thing going for it that almost nothing else on this list has. It's what's called a short day plant, meaning it actually performs better as daylight hours shrink. Late summer and early fall are exactly the conditions it wants. The mistake here is sowing spinach into soil that's still too warm, especially if your soil leans acidic. Spinach struggles badly below a pH of about 6, and that stress shows up as stunted growth and pale, yellowing leaves. So before you sow, loosen the soil down to somewhere between 12 and 18 inches, since spinach sends down a fairly deep taproot, and aim for a pH closer to neutral, somewhere around 6.5 to 7. Give it 45 to 60 days to mature. Reliable varieties include Chesapeake, Bloomstill, Melody, Space, and Tyee. Because you're working with shrinking daylight instead of the lengthening days of spring, you avoid the bolting that ruins so many spring spinach plantings, and you end up with a denser, more tender rosette of leaves. 3. Leaf lettuce. Lettuce is the crop that trips up more August gardeners than almost anything else, and it's not because lettuce is hard to grow. It's because lettuce seed has a built-in defense mechanism. Once soil temperature climbs past roughly 80 degrees Fahrenheit, the seed essentially refuses to germinate. It's not a fluke, it's the plant protecting itself. So the fix is about cooling that top inch of soil, not fighting the plant. You've got 2 solid options. Rig up a shade cloth at around 30 to 50% density over the seeded row to knock the surface temperature down, or start your seeds indoors somewhere cool, around 60 to 70 degrees, for 3 or 4 weeks, then transplant them out in the late afternoon so the seedlings aren't shocked by full sun right away. Stick to bolt-resistant or slow bolt varieties like Arctic King or Winter Density, since they're built to handle the tail end of summer heat without immediately turning bitter. Give it somewhere between 45 and 70 days depending on variety, and you'll have sweet, crisp lettuce instead of the bitter, milky mess that spring lettuce so often becomes. 4. Kale. This is the one I mentioned earlier, the crop that keeps getting better every time the temperature drops. Kale isn't subtle about it either. When exposed to a real frost, the plant kicks its starch-to-sugar conversion into high gear, and the leaves that come after that frost taste noticeably different than anything the same plant produced back in September. Kale isn't picky about soil, but it does best in fertile, well-draining ground with a pH somewhere between 6 and 7.5. Keep it consistently watered, around 1 to 1.5 inches a week, and lay down a thick layer of organic mulch to keep the root zone cool and hold onto that moisture. Give it 50 to 75 days depending on the variety. Improved dwarf Siberian, red Russian, red Burr and Toscano are all solid choices for a fall harvest. Harvest the outer leaves and leave the center growing, and you'll be pulling from the same plant well into the colder months, getting sweeter every week that passes. 5. Carrots. Carrots follow the exact same sugar conversion pattern as kale, just underground instead of in the leaves. As soil temperatures drop, the root accumulates sugar, and a carrot pulled after a few cool nights in October or November tastes fundamentally different from one pulled in June. The real obstacle with carrots isn't heat, it's soil structure. Heavy, rocky, or compacted soil physically blocks the taproot from growing straight down, and you end up with forked, stubby, woody roots. Sow shallow, about a 1/4 inch deep into loose, rock-free, sandy loam. One trick that actually works well here is mixing in some fast-germinating radish seed along the same row. The radishes sprout first, mark the row for you, and help break up any surface crusting before the slower carrot seeds come up. Give carrots 70 to 80 days. Little Finger, Nance, Imperator 58, Danvers 126, and Calliope Blend are all dependable choices for a fall crop. The payoff is straighter, sweeter roots than anything you'd get from a summer planting. 6. Swiss chard. Chard might be the toughest all-around plant on this entire list. It handles late summer heat without bolting, and it shrugs off frost down to around 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Most cool season greens have one season, spring or fall. Chard basically covers both. One thing worth knowing before you plant, chard seed isn't actually a single seed. Each one is a small cluster containing several embryos, so once your seedlings come up, you'll need to thin them to a final spacing of about 6 inches apart, or you'll end up with a crowded mess. Give it 50 to 65 days. Bright Lights, Rainbow, Fordhook Giant, Lucullus and Rhubarb chard are all worth growing, though it's worth knowing that the plain white-stemmed varieties actually tend to hold up better in serious cold than the colorful ones, even if they're less photogenic. Chard also gives you 2 separate ingredients from one plant. The leaves cook down fast like spinach, while the thick stems need a few extra minutes in the pan. Cook the stems first, add the leaves near the end, and you get 2 textures out of a single harvest. 7. Beets. Beets give you 2 harvests for the price of one. The greens come in early and are edible well before the roots are ready, tasting something like a milder, earthier spinach. The roots follow later, sweetening as the weather cools the same way carrots do. The most common mistake with beets is skipping the thinning step. Because beet seed, like chard, comes in small multi-seed clusters, skipping this step leaves you with crowded, deformed roots that never get the room they need to expand. Thin to a final spacing of 3 to 4 inches once seedlings reach about 2 inches tall, and keep soil moisture consistent, since uneven watering causes a defect called zoning, where you get unattractive white rings inside the root. Give beets 50 to 70 days. Detroit Dark Red, Ruby Queen, and Early Wonder are all reliable performers for a fall crop, and the roots you pull after a few cool nights will be noticeably sweeter than anything grown in early summer. 8. Turnips. Turnips get a bad reputation in a lot of American kitchens, mostly because people have only ever eaten the large, old, storage-type turnip, which really can be starchy and sharp. A turnip pulled young from an August planting is a completely different vegetable. Turnips are also dual-purpose. The greens are edible starting around 30 days, well before the root is ready, and they cook up similar to mustard greens, with a bit of peppery bite. Thin the roots to a final spacing of 2 to 3 inches so they have room to swell properly. Give turnips 45 to 70 days. Purple Top White Globe, Shogun, and Tokyo Cross are all solid options. Like almost everything else on this list, a touch of autumn frost tempers the sharpness in both the greens and the root, leaving something much milder and sweeter than what most people expect from a turnip. 9. Peas. Peas are one of the most overlooked fall crops, mostly because everyone associates them with spring. But peas genuinely thrive in crisp autumn air, and a fall pea harvest tends to avoid a lot of the fungal problems that spring plantings deal with in damp, humid weather. The mistake with fall peas is sowing them too shallow while the soil is still warm, which stalls germination. Sow at a full 2 inches deep, so the seed makes contact with cooler, damper soil below the surface, and lay down a straw mulch over the bed for the first couple of weeks to keep things cool while the seeds get established. Peas also need a trellis or net to climb, which keeps the vines off damp ground and cuts down on powdery and downy mildew. Give peas 60 to 90 days. Oregon sugar pod, sugar ann, wando, and green arrow are all excellent choices for a late-season planting. 10. Kohlrabi. Kohlrabi is the strange-looking one on this list. A round, swollen stem sitting just above the soil with leaves shooting out in every direction. It confuses a lot of people in the grocery store, but it's genuinely one of the easiest things to grow and eat. Peel it, slice it, eat it raw, and you get something that tastes like a cross between a mild broccoli stem and a crisp apple. The mistake is letting it grow too long. Once kohlrabi sits past its window, the lower stem starts developing tough, woody fibers, a process called lignification, and the texture never recovers. Harvest it once the bulb reaches about 2 to 3 inches across, roughly the size of a tennis ball. Give it 50 to 70 days. Grand Duke, Purple Vienna, and White Vienna are all good picks, and honestly the purple and white versions taste nearly identical, so pick whichever looks better to you on a plate. That's 10 down, 10 still to go, and honestly some of what's coming up might be the most useful vegetables on this whole list, especially if you want something that keeps producing well into winter. If this has been helpful so far, this is a good moment to subscribe, since it means you won't miss the follow-up video on protecting these crops once the real cold hits. And if you just joined partway through, go ahead and drop your location and your usual first frost date in the comments too. I want to see how wide that range actually is across everyone watching this. Alright, let's keep going. 11. Broccoli. Broccoli has a reputation for being difficult, and that reputation mostly comes from people planting it in spring, watching it bolt in early summer heat before it ever forms a proper head, and giving up on it entirely. The plant isn't the problem, timing is. For an August planting, transplants beat direct seeding by a wide margin. Set out transplants that already have 4 to 6 mature leaves, which skips the most heat-vulnerable stage of the plant's life entirely. Once they're in the ground, keep watering consistent, around 1 to 1.5 inches a week, and add a nitrogen-rich side dressing 3 to 4 weeks after transplanting to support all that leafy growth. Give broccoli 60 to 80 days. Green Comet, Pac-Man, Green Hornet, and Premium Crop are all good choices for a full harvest. Cut the central head while the buds are still tight and green, since a delayed harvest leads to loose, yellowing heads that lose most of their flavor. After that main head comes off, don't pull the plant. Side shoots will keep coming for weeks afterward. 12. Cabbage. Cabbage is one of the toughest crops on this entire list once it matures, tolerating temperatures as low as 20 to 25 degrees Fahrenheit without any real damage. For a full harvest, stick with quicker maturing transplants rather than starting from seed this late. The main mistake with cabbage is inconsistent watering. If the soil dries out and then gets hit with a heavy fall rain, the sudden shift in pressure inside the plant can literally split the head open. Keep irrigation steady, and even the whole way through instead of letting it swing between dry and soaked. Give cabbage 75 to 90 days. As the plant acclimates to the dropping temperatures heading into fall, it builds up natural sugars in its cells that act almost like an antifreeze, protecting it from cold damage and, as a side effect, making the head taste noticeably better than a cabbage grown and harvested in the heat of summer. 13. Cauliflower. I'll be honest, this is the most temperamental plant on the whole list, so it's worth going in with the right expectations. Any real stress on this plant, whether it's heat, drought, or root disturbance during transplanting, can trigger something called buttoning, where the plant panics and forms a tiny, useless curd way too early. If you can manage the stress, the payoff is worth it. Once the curd reaches 2 to 3 inches across, gather the large outer leaves and tie them loosely over the top with soft twine or a rubber band. This blocks sunlight and keeps the curd pale and tender instead of yellowing and toughening in direct sun. Some self-blanching varieties handle this step on their own, but manual tying is still the standard approach for late summer plantings. Give cauliflower 70 to 80 days. Majestic, Snow Crown, Snow King, and Self-Blanch are all solid picks. Do this right and you get tight, pure white heads instead of the loose, yellow-tinged ones that come from a stressed plant. 14. Collard greens. Collards are unusually heat-tolerant for a brassica, which makes them one of the easiest things on this entire list to get established in the middle of August heat. On the other end of the spectrum, they're also brutally cold hardy, surviving hard freezes down to around 15 degrees Fahrenheit without any trouble. Collards are heavy feeders, so work some composted manure into the bed before planting and add a nitrogen-rich side dressing about 4 weeks after the plants come up. Harvest the large outer leaves from the bottom, as the plant keeps growing upward from the center, which lets one planting keep producing for a long stretch. Give collards 75 to 85 days. Vates, Carolina Improved Heading, Georgia Southern, and Blue Max are all excellent choices. Once a real autumn frost hits, the leaves undergo a fast conversion of their more bitter compounds into sugar, and the difference in flavor before and after that first frost is honestly dramatic. 15. Bush beans. This one might surprise you, since beans are usually thought of as a warm season crop, but a quick round of bush beans planted right at the start of August can still finish well before your first frost in a lot of regions. The catch is you need to get them in the ground immediately, not later in the month. Bush beans are sensitive to temperature swings on both ends. Consistent heat above 90 degrees can cause the blossoms to drop before they ever form a pod, while temperatures below 50 stall growth entirely. They're also light feeders, so go easy on nitrogen, since too much will push the plant toward leafy growth instead of pods. Give bush beans 50 to 60 days. Early Contender, Derby, Provider, Blue Lake, and Cherokee Wax are all good choices for this kind of late-season push. Think of this as one last concentrated flush of fresh beans before the warm season crops close out for good. 16. Mustard greens. Mustard greens are one of the fastest growing things on this list, maturing in as little as 30 to 40 days. Plant them too early in the thick of summer heat, though, and the leaves come in aggressively sharp, almost too intense for most people to enjoy. The fix is timing. Wait until the second half of August to plant, so the plant matures right as the weather starts cooling into September. That cooler stretch during maturity softens the sharpness considerably and brings out a much better balance between spice and sweetness. Young leaves harvested small work well raw in a salad, while mature leaves are fantastic slow cooked, especially with a bit of smoked meat in the classic southern style. Harvest young and leave the center of the plant growing, and you can keep cutting fresh leaves well into October. 17. Arugula. Arugula is the speed pick on this list for anyone who wants fresh salad greens fast. Most varieties are ready to harvest in around 3 weeks, so a planting now could genuinely be on your table before September even gets going. The biggest mistake with arugula is letting the leaves grow too big before harvesting. Small leaves, somewhere around 2 to 3 inches, are mild and pleasantly peppery. Let those same leaves stretch to 5 or 6 inches, and the flavor turns aggressively sharp and bitter, enough to overwhelm anything you put it in. Harvest with scissors, cutting about an inch above the soil, and new growth will come back within 10 to 12 days. Plant one small patch now and another about 2 weeks later, and you'll have a steady supply of mild, fresh arugula running from late August all the way through October. 18. Bok choy. Bok choy doesn't get nearly enough attention in home gardens, which is a shame because it's one of the more rewarding things you can grow in a fall garden. Baby varieties are ready in about 30 days, while full-size types take somewhere between 45 and 60. The one thing that trips people up is trying to germinate bok choy seed in full, unshaded August sun, since the seed struggles badly once soil temperatures climb past around 80 degrees. Give it some afternoon shade and keep the soil consistently moist until the seedlings are established, and it handles the rest of the summer heat just fine from there. Bok choy loses its signature crunch and sweetness within a few days of harvest, which is part of why the version at most grocery stores never quite compares to one picked straight from your own garden right before dinner. 19. Scallions. Scallions aren't the flashiest thing on this list, but they might end up being the one you actually use the most. Fresh green onion on eggs in soup, tossed over anything grilled. Having a patch of these just outside your kitchen door is one of those small conveniences that makes gardening feel worthwhile every single day. Seeds sprout in around 7 to 10 days and are ready to harvest around the 60-day mark. The trick that stretches your harvest is simple. Don't pull the whole plant. Snip the green tops with scissors about an inch above the soil and leave the bulb where it is. New growth comes back in about 10 to 14 days, which means one planting can give you multiple cuttings before the season winds down. Scallions need almost nothing from you beyond regular water and a narrow strip of soil, which makes this one of the lowest effort, highest reward crops on the entire list. 20. Brussels sprouts. This is the one worth saving for last, because it's the clearest example of everything we've talked about today. Brussels sprouts need a long season to mature, so if you're growing these from transplants, get them in the ground as early in August as you possibly can, especially if you're in a colder region. Brussels sprouts are extremely cold hardy, and they actually need a real cold snap to hit their peak. The sprouts that mature after several hard frosts are dramatically sweeter and more tender than anything the plant produces earlier in the season. This is honestly the reason so many people say they don't like Brussels sprouts. What they've usually had is a version harvested too early or grown in the wrong season entirely. Grown properly, timed for a fall and early winter harvest, they're an entirely different vegetable. 20 vegetables, all of them going into the ground within the next few weeks, and every single one of them designed to hit its peak flavor right around the time everyone else has already written off their garden for the year. Here's the thing worth remembering as you head out to plant any of these. August was never actually the end of the season. It's the start of the stretch where your garden tastes the best it's going to taste all year, because these crops aren't just tolerating the cold coming in September, October, and November. They're using it. Every one of them gets better because of it, not in spite of it. So before you close this out, tell me which one of these 20 you're planting first. And if you haven't already, drop your zone and your typical first frost date in the comments, because someone gardening in your exact climate is probably scrolling through those same comments right now looking for that answer. If this was useful, go ahead and subscribe, since there's a follow-up coming on how to protect and extend all of these crops once the real cold weather rolls in, and you won't want to miss it. Get out there and get planting. See you in the next one.